This is my grandfather's motorcycle that hadn't started in almost 30 years. They were already planning to throw it away, but as soon as I found out about it, I immediately drove to the village where it had been sitting all this time. Standing in front of me was a 1960 motorcycle in incredibly rough condition. The tires were completely flat. The tires themselves were almost 100 years old. Almost all of the paint had peeled off and rust had spread to nearly every single part. The engine was covered in a thick layer of oil and dirt, and it was attached to the frame with nothing more than an ordinary rusty screwdriver. But the biggest question was, what exactly had failed after all those years? In this video, I'm going to try to bring this moped back to life after sitting unused for almost 30 years. We've got a complete engine rebuild ahead of us, installing all the missing parts and dealing with a whole bunch of unexpected problems. But by the end of this video, we'll ride this legendary motorcycle again for the first time in decades. But first, we should probably inflate the tires. We connect the air pump and fill them up. This moped is powered by a 50 cubic centimeter 2-stroke engine that runs on a gasoline and oil mixture. The fuel tank was empty, so we need to fill it up. We mix the gasoline with the oil, then give the bottle a good shake so everything blends together before pouring it into the tank. We open the fuel petcock and prime the carburetor. We switch on the ignition and kick the starter lever. For some reason, it just slips. The kickstart mechanism is probably broken, but there's another way to start this moped. First, we shift into neutral and push the moped as hard as we can. Once it picks up enough speed, we shift into second gear and release the clutch. The moped didn't start on the first attempt, so we tried again. I made countless unsuccessful attempts, and the moped never showed the slightest sign of life. I think the problem is the spark plug. We disconnect the spark plug wire and remove the spark plug with a spark plug wrench. After taking a closer look, we noticed a small amount of carbon buildup, so we cleaned it off with a wire brush. Let's try one more time. And yes, the moped finally started, but it wouldn't idle without constantly revving the throttle, and something inside the engine was rattling. Even so, I got on the moped to take it for a ride, but unfortunately it didn't go as planned. It had absolutely no power. It looked like the engine had reached the end of its life. I pushed it, gave it throttle, but the moped still wouldn't move. Then it stalled completely. The motorcycle is in extremely poor condition, so I loaded it up and took it to my workshop where the restoration would begin. After inspecting it, we discovered that both the engine and the fuel system were faulty, so they had to come off the moped. Before removing them, we drained the transmission oil. We placed a container underneath, removed the drain plug, and waited for all the oil to drain out. Just look at this. Look how black it is. Next, we disconnected the fuel line and the throttle cable, removed the air filter along with all the remaining wires and connections. Then we removed the completely rusted exhaust. We sprayed lubricant on the bolts holding the engine to the frame. After that, we loosened them without any trouble and removed the engine from the moped. Now we can move it to the workbench and continue the repair. We removed the nuts holding the carburetor in place and took it off the engine. At this point, we still had no idea what we were going to find inside, but even at this stage, we discovered a torn gasket. That was one of the reasons the motorcycle wouldn't start. We began disassembling the engine. We removed the nut securing the cylinder head, After taking the cylinder head off, we found a heavy layer of carbon buildup caused by poor quality fuel. Next, we removed the cylinder. Take a look at the piston, it's covered in deep scratches. Then we shined a flashlight inside the cylinder and saw a pretty horrifying sight. Because of the worn out piston assembly, the moped was no longer capable of moving under its own power. We removed the screws holding the cover that protects the ignition system. Then we removed the drive sprocket and the ignition assembly. After loosening the fasteners, we pulled this part out in one smooth motion. We inspected it carefully and didn't find any defects. Next, we needed to remove the flywheel. And to do that, we loosened the long bolt holding it in place and gently tapped it with a rubber mallet to help free it from the crankshaft. Using a wrench as a lever, we pulled the flywheel off. We flipped the engine over and removed the rusty Kickstarter lever. Then we removed the screw securing the clutch cover and took it off. Take a look at this gasket. Entire sections of it were missing. That's exactly why the engine was covered in oil. After removing the retaining clip and taking apart the clutch, we decided to inspect the clutch discs. One of them was cracked, so they'll all have to be replaced. Next, we removed the rotor, giving us access to the bolts holding the two crankcase halves together. We removed all of them. Once every bolt was out, we grabbed a rubber mallet and gently tapped both halves of the engine. That was enough to separate the crankcase without any effort. The first thing that caught our attention was the metal shavings. Where do you think they came from? When we inspected the crankshaft, we discovered it had excessive play. The kickstart mechanism itself was still in good condition. It simply didn't work because the return spring was missing. The transmission was also in good shape. This entire assembly rotates on bearings, but they were already making a lot of noise. We removed them because they'll all be replaced with new ones. Now we can see every component that makes up the engine of this motorcycle. Unfortunately, parts like the cylinder, crankshaft, and bearings are beyond saving. We won't be using them again. But the parts that are still in good condition definitely deserve a thorough cleaning to remove all the oil and dirt. Parts into a large plastic container. Then we completely covered them with gasoline since it's the best cleaner for this kind of job. Next, we grabbed a paintbrush and started cleaning every single part. After that, we rinsed everything with clean gasoline to remove the remaining dirt. Now every engine component is perfectly clean. Just look at how dirty the gasoline became after washing all those parts. Since the old components were no longer usable, I ordered a complete set of brand new replacement parts. Let's see what arrived. Inside the box was a brand new piston kit. Then we took out a complete gasket set for the engine, a new crankshaft, a set of bearings, a carburetor rebuild kit, and a set of original clutch discs. But that wasn't everything inside the box. We'll need the remaining parts in the next episode. As a bonus, the seller also included a manual packed with useful information about repairing and maintaining vintage motorcycles. Now it's finally time to start assembling the engine. We placed one half of the crankcase on a sheet of sandpaper and sanded the surface using circular motions. Then we repeated the exact same process with the other half. After that, we switched to a finer grit sandpaper and continued sanding. Perfect! Almost all of the imperfections are gone, and whatever tiny imperfections remain will be sealed by the gasket and gasket maker. Now it's time to install the new bearings. To make the job easier, we first heated the bearing seats with a gas torch. Then we positioned the bearing and pressed it into place. As the metal heats up, it expands, allowing the bearing to slide into its seat much more easily. Using the same method, we installed the rest of the bearings. Then we lightly lubricated them with oil so they'll operate more reliably during the first startup. Now we can install the crankshaft. We carefully guided the end of the crankshaft into the bearing and gently pressed it into place using a wooden block. Next, we installed the transmission, lubricated the bearing seats, and assembled everything in the correct order. Then we installed the kickstart mechanism. Everything was almost ready to join the two halves of the engine together. But before that, we applied gasket maker to the mating surfaces that we had already cleaned and degreased. We spread the gasket maker evenly using a wooden stick. Next, we installed a new gasket, and just to be safe, apply another thin layer of gasket maker on top of it. Now we can finally join the two halves of the engine together. We carefully guide the shafts into the bearings and gently press the two halves together. All that's left now is to secure everything with the bolts. To keep them from loosening due to vibration, we apply thread locker. We tighten them in a crisscross pattern to ensure even pressure across the entire surface. As you can see, there are no gaps anywhere. That means the engine will be perfectly sealed. However, to keep oil from leaking through the bearings, we also need to install new oil seals. First, we carefully press them in by hand. Then we gently tap them into place using a wooden block and a hammer. Now we can secure the flywheel in place. Next, we move on to the clutch. We install every component in its proper position so everything works exactly as it should. We put this gear back in place and secure the clutch with the retaining nuts. The clutch is now fully assembled. Next, we'll install the new piston assembly. It all starts with installing the piston rings. We lightly coat the piston ring grooves and the rings themselves with oil. This is how the piston rings are installed. We place the piston onto the connecting rod and insert the wrist pin using a long bolt and a nut. We slowly press the wrist pin into place. Next, we install the new cylinder base gasket. We lightly lubricate the cylinder with oil and slide it into place. Then we install the cylinder head with a new gasket and tighten it down completely. With that, the piston assembly is fully installed. Now we move to the right side of the engine. We install the flywheel onto the crankshaft and tighten it securely. Next comes this component. We bolt it down, but not all the way, because now it's time to adjust the ignition timing. We found a very simple method in the service manual. We insert the spark plug upside down into the cylinder head, then rotate the crankshaft until the piston reaches top dead center, and the ignition coil lines up with the notch on the flywheel. Once the ignition timing is properly adjusted, we install the spark plug. We install a brand new drive sprocket, and all that's left is to close up the engine with these covers. But before that, let's restore their appearance. We sand the covers using abrasive pads with different grit levels. After sanding, the covers shine like new again. Now we install the clutch cover, making sure to fit a new gasket first. At the same time, we also install a brand new Kickstarter lever. The complete engine rebuild is finally finished. I really hope I assembled everything correctly. Now it's time to rebuild the carburetor. We completely disassemble it. Inside, there was a small mesh screen that had collected quite a bit of dirt. When we reached the float bowl, we discovered that the float was full of gasoline because it had developed a leak, and that's definitely not a good sign. The carburetor is now completely disassembled. Now every part needs to be cleaned. For that, we use gasoline and a small brush. We carefully scrub every component with the brush, then spray everything with carburetor cleaner to remove any remaining dirt. Now every carburetor component is perfectly clean. Everything is ready for reassembly, but first we'll need this rebuild kit. We start by installing the adjustment screws. Then we assemble the throttle slide mechanism. Next, we install a new mesh screen. We secure the float in place and install the new float needle. We replace every gasket with a new one and finish assembling the carburetor. The carburetor is now fully rebuilt. Now we can install it back onto the engine, where we've already fitted new gaskets. The engine is now completely ready to be reinstalled into the motorcycle. We mount the engine using brand new bolts. After cleaning and reinstalling the chain, we bolt this cover back into place. We reconnect all the control cables as well as the electrical wiring. We decided to replace the old fuel line and fuel filter with brand new ones. The air filter will also be replaced with a new one. Next, we fill the transmission with fresh oil. The exhaust system, which was completely rusted out, is also replaced with a brand new one. With that, the engine restoration is finally complete. In my opinion, after rebuilding the engine, the overall appearance of the moped has improved as well. But after all this work, will it actually run the way it's supposed to? Let's head outside and find out. We prime the carburetor with fuel, switch on the ignition, and kick the starter lever. After a couple of attempts, the engine finally comes to life. Now it's time to take the moped out for its first test ride. But first, let's not forget to put on a helmet. After everything we've done, the moped accelerates quickly, and I don't even have to open the throttle all the way. The transmission works perfectly too. The gears shift smoothly with no grinding, sticking, or other issues. This is my first time riding such an old motorcycle, and I have to say, I really like it despite all the flaws it still has. The brakes are practically non-existent. The suspension and steering are both in very poor condition. And out of the entire electrical system, the only thing that actually works is the ignition switch. And of course, the moped still needs a complete repaint. You'll see me fix all of those problems in the next episode, so make sure to subscribe to the channel so you don't miss it. And don't forget to leave a like. See you very soon.